If you think the world always recognizes greatness, think again. This is the story they never wanted you to read, the one that will make you question every judgment you've ever made at first glance. Stay until the end, and if it grips your heart the way it gripped mine, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that expose the unseen truth behind ordinary faces. It started as an ordinary Thursday morning in Eastwell, a small city known for its bright coffee shops and gray prejudices, where people smiled politely while quietly measuring one another's worth by the shine of their shoes and the color of their skin. And Marcus Hill, 39 years old, widowed, father of an 11-year-old boy named Caleb, was simply trying to make it through another day without breaking. He woke before dawn, as usual, made Caleb's lunch, pressed his son's uniform, and counted out the exact change for breakfast, though he knew it wouldn't be enough to cover the late fees on the electricity bill waiting at home. His life had been a careful balance between quiet dignity and relentless fatigue ever since his wife, Rochelle, had passed from cancer 3 years earlier, leaving him to navigate both fatherhood and grief. What no one in Eastwell knew, what Marcus preferred to keep private, was that he held a position so secret most of the local police didn't even know it existed. By day, he looked like any other tired single dad. By night, he was the director of the National Security Directorate, a federal agency responsible for counterintelligence and cyber defense. He had chosen anonymity deliberately, living in an unremarkable neighborhood to give Caleb a normal life, a home where laughter could exist without bodyguards or black SUVs waiting outside. That morning, after dropping Caleb at school, he stopped by a local convenience store to grab coffee and a pack of markers for his son's science project. He paid with a crisp $50, freshly withdrawn from a government stipend account the night before. The cashier, a nervous young man named Kenny, eyed the bill with suspicion, holding it to the light like an artifact, and Marcus, too tired to be offended, simply smiled and said, "It's real, brother, I promise." But Kenny, still uncertain, pressed the bill between his fingers and called out, "Hey, Frank, can you check this?" To the store manager, whose expression turned from confusion to something else, something Marcus had seen too many times in his life. "You mind waiting here, sir?" Frank said, and disappeared behind the counter, whispering into his phone. Marcus felt the familiar pit of dread rise in his stomach, not because he had done anything wrong, but because he recognized that look, the silent calculation of a man who thought he was catching a criminal. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing in the broad daylight, and customers turned their heads like spectators at a low-budget tragedy. The officers, both young, both certain, stepped out with that overconfident rhythm of men who believed their badges made them infallible. "Sir," said one, hand already near his holster, "we've received a report you tried to pay with counterfeit currency." Marcus blinked, confused, then laughed softly. "That's a misunderstanding," he said, but before he could reach for his ID, the officer grabbed his wrist, spun him around, and pressed him against the squad car hood. The metal burned cold. Someone across the street recorded on their phone. Another shouted, "Guess even dads are out here scamming these days." Marcus wanted to scream, not from pain, but from the absurdity. In his pocket, under his folded credentials, sat the encrypted badge that could authorize top-level surveillance nationwide, yet none of that mattered in this moment. They didn't see power. They saw a stereotype. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, he heard Caleb's voice in his mind, asking the same question he'd asked once before after seeing a similar video online. "Dad, why do they always think we're bad guys first?" In the police car, Marcus kept calm, silently rehearsing how he would explain this to Caleb later. At the precinct, they booked him, photographed him, took his fingerprints, all while he said nothing. He wanted to see how far their ignorance would take them. "You're looking at 5 years for fraud if this comes back fake," one officer sneered, slamming the report onto the desk. Marcus finally spoke. "May I make a phone call?" The officer laughed. "Sure. To who? Your lawyer?" "Something like that," Marcus replied, dialing a number memorized by every top clearance operative. The call connected instantly. "This is Director Hill," he said calmly. "I've been detained by local officers under suspicion of counterfeit currency. Please initiate verification protocol." The officer at the desk rolled his eyes. Until less than 2 minutes later, every screen in the precinct flickered. A red alert banner flashed. "Security override. Classified clearance detected. Phones began to ring. The captain stormed out of his office, face pale. "Who the hell did you arrest?" he barked. The young officer stammered, "Just, some guy using fake money." The captain turned to Marcus. "Sir, I'm so sorry, Director Hill." Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus stood, cuffs still on, and stared at the wall where his mugshot now glowed under the word, "Authorized." "Remove these," he said quietly. They rushed to obey. He rubbed his wrists, his calm demeanor suddenly sharper. "You see," he said, "this is what happens when assumption outruns judgment." The captain begged forgiveness, offering to erase all records, but Marcus only nodded slowly. "No, keep them," he said. "You'll need the reminder." He walked out into the sunlight, reporters already gathering outside because word travels fast when embarrassment tastes this public. Someone shouted, "Director Hill, is it true you were mistaken for a counterfeiter?" Marcus looked straight into the cameras. "It's true I was mistaken," he said. "The rest you can decide for yourselves." By that evening, the footage had gone viral. The arrest, the revelation, the collective disbelief. News anchors debated whether it was racial profiling, systemic failure, or just a tragic misunderstanding, but Marcus didn't care for their narratives. He sat with Caleb that night on their worn couch, the TV flickering with his own face. "So they know who you are now?" Caleb asked quietly. "Yeah," Marcus said, "but that doesn't mean they know me." The boy thought for a while, then smiled. "At least now they'll think twice before grabbing another dad." Marcus wanted to believe that. Yet he knew public outrage was a wave, loud, temporary, and quick to move on. 2 days later, his agency's advisory board urged him to handle the situation discreetly, to preserve the department's image. Marcus refused. He announced an internal review into law enforcement training, accountability, and community relations, leveraging his newfound visibility. "If they can handcuff the head of national security for buying coffee," he told the press, "imagine what happens to those without power." His words resonated far beyond Eastwell. Within weeks, reforms began. Transparency protocols, anonymous complaint systems, community oversight panels. Some officers resigned in protest, others came forward with apologies. Frank, the store manager, tried to visit Marcus to apologize in person, but Marcus declined the meeting, leaving only a note. "Forgiveness is earned through change, not words." Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could for a man whose private identity had become a public lesson. Caleb's school invited Marcus to speak at a civics event, and though he hesitated, he agreed, standing before hundreds of students to tell them that true power doesn't come from titles or authority, but from restraint and understanding. Yet even as applause filled the hall, he couldn't shake a new unease. One night, he received a message on his secure line, an anonymous file labeled, "Project Clean Slate." Inside were records suggesting the mistake at the convenience store hadn't been random, it had been orchestrated. Someone within his own agency had leaked his civilian identity to test his composure, a power play meant to remind him that no one, not even the director, was untouchable. Rage flared, but Marcus stayed silent, biding his time. He traced the leak to a deputy director named Armitage, a man with friends in high places and enemies buried quietly. When confronted, Armitage smirked. "You handled it well," he said. "Think of it as a stress test." Marcus stared him down. "You don't test integrity by humiliating fathers in front of their sons." He suspended Armitage immediately, though he knew the move would spark political blowback. The next morning, tabloids framed it as revenge. Congress called for hearings. But Marcus, unshaken, told them the truth on record. "If our systems can't distinguish integrity from threat, then our systems are broken." His words echoed across networks, turning him from a bureaucrat into a reluctant symbol. Eventually, the same officers who'd arrested him were reassigned to community service divisions where they'd train under programs Marcus himself designed. He made sure they weren't fired, because punishment without education breeds only bitterness. One day, Officer Dalton, the one who'd cuffed him, approached him after a seminar. "Director Hill," he said awkwardly, "I've been reading, learning, I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "Keep learning," he said. "That's the only apology that matters." The officer smiled faintly. Years later, Marcus would tell the story differently, without anger, without self-pity. He'd tell Caleb's children that the day he was arrested was the day he realized leadership wasn't about controlling others, but about refusing to let bitterness control you. Still, some nights, he'd stare at that same convenience store on his way home from work. It had changed owners, remodeled, rebranded, but every now and then, he'd see a customer paying for coffee, and he'd wonder if the clerk still held bills up to the light, searching for what was fake. Because the truth, Marcus knew, was that counterfeits come in many forms, not just in paper, but in people, in justice, in apologies. And maybe that's why he still carried that original $50 bill, laminated now, in his wallet. Not as proof of innocence, but as proof that dignity, once tested, only grows stronger under fire. And if you've read this far, if you've felt that tightening in your chest as assumption turns to revelation, then remember this: every face you pass hides a story bigger than your judgment. Subscribe to that truth. Carry it the way Marcus carried his scarred wrists, not as a mark of shame, but as a reminder of what we all owe each other: the grace to look twice before we condemn once.